Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to another week. It is now Monday the 18th of May, which means it's now 2 solid months of lockdown for me. I think technically week 9. My last school event, I think, was on the 17th of March or maybe the 13th. It was sometime around then anyway. It's so far ago, I can barely remember it. Except I do remember it because we played Dungeons and Dragons for the whole thing, which was pretty awesome. But yeah, so it's coming on for 9 weeks, 10 weeks of lockdown, and I'm okay. I've just been doing some writing and doing my reading to you, which is nice, and hanging out with the kids. And I know terrible things are happening, but actually parts of lockdown have been all right. It's getting very frustrating and a bit lonely, missing my family. But we're coping. I hope you're doing all right. I hope that you're safe and staying strong wherever you are. I don't know if lockdown is continuing for you wherever you are, or whether you're kind of gradually getting eased back into work. But just try and remember to be safe and always listen to your instincts. That's what I would say in times like these. As far as lockdown is concerned, we are now about to start book 4. Which is really exciting. Book 4 is Fugitives. Now, this is the book that I remember least well out of the whole series. Remember Lockdown very well, Solitary, Death Sentence. They're all very vivid in my head. And Executioners as well. But for some reason, this is the one that I don't remember that well. And it's been a long time since I've read it. So it would be interesting to see which bits of it I remember and which bits of it I don't. I would say it's probably been 6 or 7 years since I've read this one. So I don't know if it's anybody's favourite. It tends not to be people's favourite. But I would say out of all of them, this one's probably the most action-packed one. I think some of them are quite horror, but this one always feels like it's the most action-packed and the most action-y of the series. But I might have remembered that completely wrong. I do remember bits, but we'll see. So, just a quick recap for anyone who is joining us. Although that's going to be some recap. Alex Sawyer starts off as a bully and a criminal. He's not a very nice guy. He spends his time stealing things from other children and breaking into people's houses and generally just being a bit of a... what's the word? Poohead. We'll go with poohead. Since my kids might be listening. So he's not very nice. He one day breaks into a house with his best friend Toby. They think the house is empty. They think it's just going to make a bit of money. The house isn't empty. It's full of giants in black suits with silver eyes and a horrible twisted figure with a gas mask on his face. Alex's friend Toby gets shot and killed, and Alex gets framed for his murder and sent to Furnace Penitentiary. Furnace Penitentiary is the world's worst prison for young offenders. It's buried a mile beneath the ground. Once you're there until you die, and that doesn't take long because this prison is full of gangs and full of monsters and full of guards, and all of them will try and kill you at some point in Furnace Penitentiary. Alex meets up with his cellmate Donovan. Donovan turns out to be the most awesome guy ever. He learns about the Blood Watch, about the Weezers taking children from their cells, and the Warden, this horrible twisted figure that nobody can look in the eye. Alex devises a way to escape by blowing a hole in the floor with gas-filled gloves from the kitchen. He recruits Donovan and another kid, Z, to help him out. And another little kid, Toby, and they break out of Furnace. They blow up the prison, and they break out, but they end up in solitary confinement because it takes them into a river, and they get captured by the warden. They get sent to solitary confinement where they get locked in a hole in the ground, and down there they realise that actually there's a war going on in the tunnels beneath Furnace, and there are these creatures called rats down there that used to be humans or other animals that have been experimented on, and Alex and Z try and escape from Furnace. There's also another guy down there called Simon. Simon helps them escape. Simon's kind of been half experimented on, and they devise a plan to climb up a piece of rock called the Steeple. So they manage to do that, but they don't get out, and they have to come back down. And then they realise that if they get into the incinerator, which is where they burn all the bodies, they can climb up the incinerator and escape that way. So Alex and Z and Simon make a plan at the end of Solitary to climb up the chimney of the incinerator, but at that point the incinerator gets turned on and they crash back down and they're captured by the warden again, and Alex now begins his transformation into a black suit. Now the warden turns his eyes into silver eyes, which you can see in the dark. He strips out some of his muscle and puts in other muscle and basically butchers him and turns him into this hulking beast of a boy. And the only reason he can stay alive is because he's pumped full of nectar. Nectar is this mysterious substance. Nobody really knows what it is, which can just basically keep you alive even after most horrific injury or surgery. And Alex starts losing his mind. He starts becoming a black suit, and he starts listening to the warden's rhetoric and thinking, I think the warden's right. Weak people shouldn't live. Only the strong deserve to live. And the warden mentions the fact that they are working towards a new kind of fatherland, and the warden obviously has his roots in kind of Nazi Germany and Nazi propaganda, as he talks about a new fatherland where only the strong survive, and by strong he means people that he's experimented on. And Alex starts to lose himself, and at one point he kills Ozzy, who... Was it Ozzy or Pete? No, it was Ozzy. He kills Ozzy as part of his test. He loses his mind and accidentally kills him, and then he's asked to kill Z, and he's about to do it, and then he realises that Z is one of him, and Z goes, all for one, let's get the hell out of here. And get the hell out of this. And Alex punches the warden instead. Yes! And they try to escape. So they run out of the solitary, and they pick up Simon on the way, and they manage to make their way up to general population, and they block off the route below so the warden can't get up, and everyone in the prison starts working together, and they have the great big riot and escape plan, and they have to fight these great big berserkers which the warden sends after them, which are huge hulking beasts like the size of a car or a truck. And Alex beats them all up by almost losing himself to the nectar again, and they manage to climb the elevator shaft, and then they send the elevator up for the rest of the prisoners, and everybody gets out of Furnace apart from all the ones who died. I'm really sorry about all of them. And of course Donovan, poor Donovan, never made it. So they managed to climb up the elevator shaft, and they're out in freedom. But the last thing that happened at the end of Death Sentence is that Alex remembers that when he was in the warden's quarters, when they were trying to escape from the tunnels beneath Furnace, he hears the warden's voice. Alfred Furnace's voice. Alfred Furnace is the one who built the prison, and he hears Alfred Furnace's voice basically going, "I am coming for you," and that's the last thing he remembers, or the last thing he hears, and he has this vision of an army coming to collect him. Breathe, Gordon. Okay, so that's basically where we are in the series. Okay, so we'll try and get through a couple of chapters today of Escape from Furnace, Fugitives. Happy Ever After. Oh, that's a nice chapter title. I think it's a lie, but we'll see. This is basically another summary, so sorry about that. I wish I could tell you that my story ended here. I wish I could tell you that this was my happy ever after. Because it should have been, right? I mean, we were out. We'd been to hell and back, but the important thing was that we had made it back. We'd slit open the belly of Furnace Penitentiary, spilled its guts all over the streets. It was dead, and we'd been born again, taking our first steps in a world we thought we'd lost forever. It had to be over. This had to be the end of it. All we had to do was run for the hills and live out the rest of our lives on fresh air and freedom. But can a story like mine ever have a happy ending? Does somebody like me ever deserve one? There wasn't much time for looking back as we ran from the broken gates, ushered on by the blinding brightness of the rising sun. But I couldn't help it. Even as the sound of the siren faded into birdsong, my mind replayed everything that had happened. I don't know why exactly. All I wanted to do was forget it, put everything behind me, pretend that it had never happened. But Furnace wasn't going to let me. I may have found a way out of the prison, but the prison was still buried deep inside my head, locked in every thought and every memory. I pictured myself as a kid, walking streets just like these a lifetime ago, so obsessed with money that I didn't care that I was a thief, a bully. I saw myself and Toby, a friend whose face I could no longer picture, but I would never forget, breaking into a house, hoping that we'd strike it rich. I saw us being cornered by the black suits, Furnace's hulking guards with their cruel silver eyes. I watched them shoot Toby in the head, the same way I'd watched it 100 times before, 1,000. I saw myself framed for his murder and sentenced to life without possibility of parole in Furnace Penitentiary. I saw it all in shades of black and grey and red that seemed so much brighter than the world through which I was running. The flashbacks kept coming, bleeding into my vision like some kind of hemorrhage. It felt as though I relived every single second of my incarceration. The early days where I thought the only escape I'd make was jumping off the 8th level, my cellmate Donovan and my best friend Z, the only ones keeping me sane. Lying in bed at night waiting for the Bloodwatch to come, for the Wheezers to drag me into the tunnels below, then discovering that crack in the chipping room floor and blowing our way to freedom. Only to find ourselves recaptured and snared by the darkness of solitary confinement. Sorry, it seems like there is a riot going on downstairs at the moment as well with my 3 daughters. They're fighting over toy babies at the moment, just so you know. But just pretend like it's the sound of thousands of inmates escaping from Furnace Penitentiary. There, with the weight of the world on our shoulders, we uncovered the truth about Furnace, the experiments that the Warden and the Wheezers were doing on the kids. They were pumped full of nectar, a black liquid full of tiny golden flecks, like distant stars. Then the Wheezers cut them open and stitched them back together into something completely different. I still don't know exactly how the nectar worked. If it was successful, then it turned its victim into a superhuman black suit, packed tight with muscle and able to survive an injury that would kill a mortal. You had no memory of who you were, your past life. You became one of the Warden's soldiers. That's what had happened to Donovan. But I'd killed him. I'd freed him before he could turn completely. The nectar didn't work with everybody, though. Sometimes it had no effect at all, and other times it would go wrong, poisoning its victim's soul, reducing him to a mindless, razor-clawed freak that stalked the corridors, feasting on blood. A rat. But that wasn't the worst of it. Some prisoners didn't turn into black suits or rats. They became something else, something that shouldn't be possible. The nectar chose them, flooding their bodies and causing them to mutate into immense beasts of unimaginable fury, killing machines known as berserkers. There was no telling what you'd become with nectar inside you. It was the Warden's poison that decided your fate. Z and I had been down there, in solitary, for what seemed like forever, rescued by a kid called Simon who'd managed to escape the Wheezer's knives. He'd been halfway to becoming a black suit, his torso and one arm packed with muscle, his eyes turned silver. But he'd been discarded before the procedure could be finished. Once again we made a bid for freedom, climbing the incinerator chimney, and once again we'd failed. This time we'd fallen right into the Warden's lap. The Warden. I could see his face now. Every time I blinked, he flashed up before me, his mouth twisted into that soulless smile, his eyes black pits that promised nothing but pain. He had let his Wheezers cut me open with their filthy tools and pump me full of their poison. He'd let them stuff me with someone else's muscles, someone else's flesh. He had turned me into one of them. He'd given me silver eyes and a black suit, and for a moment, for a single horrific second, I'd almost given myself to him. I'd almost called him father and myself a soldier of Furnace. But something had stopped me. Something had kept me human, and instead of making me one of them, the Warden had given me the strength I needed to make a final bid for freedom. Z, Simon and I, we fought our way up from the tunnels back into the main prison. The black suits hadn't been able to stop us. The mutant skinless dogs had cowered with their tails between their legs. The Wheezers had been powerless. Even the Warden had run out of tricks. No, only one person had come close to ending our dream of freedom. Alfred Furnace himself, the mysterious man behind the prison's darkest secrets. He had sent 2 berserkers to stop us, and only by injecting myself with more of the Warden's poison, the nectar, had I been able to stop them. The battle may not have cost me my life, but it stripped away all but the last remnants of my sanity. Now the nectar is the only thing keeping me alive, but it's also trying to turn me into one of them. It's what drives the freaks of Furnace, and freaks like me. With the help of the inmates, we cracked the gates and stormed out into the world, hundreds of us, shouting and screaming as we flooded the streets, bleeding the prison dry. We were out. We were free. That should have been it, shouldn't it? That should have been the end of my story. But how could it be? Even now I can hear the sound of gunfire as the police start to round us up, the vroom, vroom, vroom of helicopter blades overhead. Soon the entire city will be in lockdown. We haven't escaped from our prison, we've just moved into a new one. And although there are countless places to hide, there's still nowhere to run. And that's not all. Alfred Furnace is coming, and he's bringing his army. I can hear his voice in my head, carried by the nectar, and his fury is almost enough to crack my soul in 2. Yes, Furnace is coming. He will find us. And when he does, there will be all hell to pay. Some happy ending. Freedom. When you've been locked up for too long, freedom can kill you. It's overwhelming, like a dam bursting, 1,000,000,000,000 gallons of icy water surging into your head, threatening to demolish or short-circuit all that remains of your sanity. I can't think of any other way to describe it. The moment I began to run from the ruined gates of Furness, my brain started to overload, my vision flickering, my limbs surrendering, my speech failing. All that existed was that sudden rush, a moment of blind emotion, half panic, half euphoria, that felt powerful enough to stop my heart dead. Great, I thought, as I struggled to stay upright, my heart misfiring like a clogged engine, each desperate beat sending a bolt of pain through my chest. I went through all that to get out, and the second I do, my mind decides it's had enough. I stumbled, felt hands grab my arms. I stared to my side, but I couldn't make out who was there. My vision had become an ocean of dirty white, flecked with sparks. I scrunched my eyes shut, forced myself to take in a breath. It was hard, as though my body had forgotten how to perform its most basic functions. But as soon as the air hit my lungs, the whiteout began to clear. "Jesus, Alex," came a voice, the fingers on my arm squeezing hard. "I thought you'd be fitter than this, what with all the running you did inside." I let my head drop to my chest, took a second deep breath that steadied my pulse, and another that seemed to put the bones back into my limbs. This time, when I looked, I could see that Z was standing next to me, his face shiny with sweat and his eyes on fire. Somebody tugged from the other side, and I turned to see Simon, his grossly muscled arm wrapped around mine. "We got to keep moving if we don't want to end up back down there," Simon said. He stamped on the sidewalk, and I suddenly pictured the labyrinth of Furness Penitentiary deep beneath the concrete, the vast complex like some razor-toothed behemoth rising through the depths, its mouth open wide to swallow the city whole. I shook the image from my head, the motion making the world spin. A blurred shape sped past us down the road, the slap of paper shoes echoing off the buildings on either side. 2 more inmates were racing along the sidewalk opposite. It was pretty clear what they were running from. The air behind us was alive with sirens, so many of them that the sound they made had lost its undulating pitch and was now a constant, tuneless wail. In the copper-coloured skies above, 3 helicopters scoured the shrinking shadows, their spotlights silver streaks against the sun as it unfolded itself from the horizon. "Ready?" asked Z. "I know you've been through a lot, but if we don't move..." He seemed to choke at the thought of what might happen. I started running again, Z's hand on my arm for the first few steps. Been through a lot. He wasn't kidding. My body, my new body, the one that the warden had given me, was a patchwork of scars. Every time I moved, they threatened to split, and I pictured the poisoned flesh escaping from beneath my skin, the muscles uncoiling. It was an unpleasant thought. Or was it? I would have given anything to be able to undo the warden's work so easily. But it was this mutated body that had gotten us all out of Furness alive. Without it, I wouldn't have stood a chance against the berserkers. Those monsters would have torn everybody in Furness to shreds, every last living soul. I may have hated having the body of a black suit, but without it, I'd have had no body at all. "Anyone know where we are?" Simon said as he sprinted. Do either of you two know the city? I lived over in Carlton Heights, never been up this way before." I took my eyes off the road to look around, still squinting into the pale light. To our left was a warehouse of some sort, emblazoned with a massive sign shaped like a cardboard box. Similar buildings lined the street on both sides. There were dark alleyways between them and corrugated iron fences that promised hiding places beyond. But if we took cover this close to Furness, we'd be found in minutes. "I didn't live in the city," Z wheezed. "Our house was miles away. Sorry. What about you, Alex?" "Yeah, I lived here," I said, trying to get my bearings, "but on the other side of town, over the river in the suburbs. I don't think I've ever been this far south." We reached a junction, the red traffic light reflecting in the puddles below, making it look as if the street was about to erupt like a volcano. Just to get off the main road, we swung right onto a narrow side street, our pace slowing as we all fought to breathe. The buildings here were smaller, mainly shops locked up for the night. One stood out from the rest, however, a hulking lump of plastic and concrete that nudged up against the pinkening skies like a massive headstone. My breath caught with the shock of recognition. "I know this place," I spluttered. "It's Edward's Mall, isn't it?" Yeah, said Simon, wiping a hand across his brow. I think you're right. I came here when I was a kid all the time. Had no idea this was a stone's throw from Furness. I'd come here with my parents too, once a month or so. It had been like a family day out. The memories hit me like a punch to the gut. The smell of Subway sandwiches and pretzels, the hum of people, the promise of presents. I mentally slapped myself. Reminiscing would get me killed. That life, my old life, was long gone. Something popped. A gunshot from maybe a couple of streets away. We slowed down, scampering into the shadows that pooled against the shops and crouching to a halt. It had only been a few minutes since we'd gotten out, but already the new day was drawing a blanket of light over the city. At first the sight had been the best thing I'd ever witnessed. I never thought I'd see a sunrise again. But now it seemed as if nature was conspiring with Furness and with the police. If the sun can see you, so can everybody else. We should get inside, Z whispered, nodding towards the mall. You kidding? Simon replied. In 10 minutes or so that place is going to be crawling with police. We've got to move, head up to the river. If we can get into the city, we can disappear. Get on a train, hotwire a car or something. Anything to get us as far away from Furness as possible. I ain't going to get caught hiding out in some shopping centre just around the corner. Simon's got a point, I said, wanting nothing more than to rest, but desperate to put as much distance as I could between us and the prison. We should break now, run for it, before they get organised. No, you're wrong, Z said. We really need to... He broke off as one of the sirens rose up from the chorus. We froze against one another as a squad car blazed across the junction we'd just crossed, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. It had probably been following the inmates we'd seen earlier, but more would follow. Countless more. We need to get off the streets and come up with a plan, Z went on. In there we can grab some food and water and we can get out of these prison uniforms. If we're walking down the street in furnace rags, then we're definitely going to get picked up. It'll only take 5 minutes. Besides... Z looked me up and down, and I followed his gaze. My overalls, which had been falling apart to begin with, were ripped in a dozen places, my tortured skin visible beneath. Besides what? I muttered. You're practically indecent, Z said, with a glint of a smile in his eyes. Any minute now that thing's going to fall right off you, and you'll be running down the street naked. Both Simon and I began to laugh, and I had to pinch my nose to make it stop. It didn't want to, the emotion bubbling up inside me so hard that my shoulders were shaking and my ribs were singing. Even when another wailing police car roared over the intersection, taking it so fast that when it hit a bump in the road it almost took off, I was snorting into my hand. Freedom will do that to you. Though, like I was saying, you could laugh yourself right into the grave. Simon wiped a tear from his eye and turned towards the mall. After a second or two, he nodded decisively. OK, he said, but we're in and out, right? I'm not spending all day looking around the bloody shops. His words could have come from my dad. He'd said something similar every time Mum and I had dragged him into the city, and that made me laugh until I cried. I felt Z's hand clamp over my own, and gradually the moment of insanity passed. I shrugged him away and got to my feet, leading the way towards the huge building and whispering over my shoulder, OK, people, let's go shopping. Daybreak. The huge main doors of Edgeworth's Mall were still shuttered, so we walked further down the street and turned left at the next junction, walking along the side of the mall until we came to the loading bay entranceways. They opened up into nothing but darkness, and the way they sloped tunnel-like between the ground made my skin crawl. Deja vu, anyone? Z said with a nervous laugh. Come on, it's just a mall, I replied, leading the way. My silver eyes penetrated the shadows as though I was holding a flashlight, peeling away layers of gloom to reveal an empty service road that curled down and to the left. If we carried straight on, we'd get to the parking lot, but we swung around the bend to find ourselves in an enormous underground loading dock. I let my eyes drift up to see 3 sets of double doors in the far wall. It was then that I noticed the blinking red lights studded into the ceiling. We're being watched, I said, pointing. Security cameras. Forget 'em, Simon said, making his way cautiously towards the doors. He reached the low wall of one of the bays and began to haul himself up. They'd just record him. Won't nobody see that footage till we're long gone. As if to prove his point, he flicked his middle finger at the ceiling, waving it around for a second before crouching down and offering Z his hand. Z took it, letting himself be pulled up. I followed with a graceless leap, my muscles crying out as they propelled me onto the platform. Simon made his way to the nearest door, pressing gently on its handle. "It won't be," was as far as I got before the door clicked open, flooding the bay with light. Simon turned and flashed me a lopsided smile. "My brother used to work in a mall, over by Carlton," he said. "We'd sneak in sometimes after dark. Same thing everywhere. Shops are all locked, front and back, but the access areas are always open." He pushed through. "Great for playing manhunt." Beyond was a wide corridor of cinder block and concrete, lined with metal doors, and lit by just about the brightest bulbs in existence. I had to squint as we jogged along it. "Computer games?" Simon said, reading the names of the shops stencilled on the back of the doors. "Nope. How about some books?" "Yeah, right. Alex, you remember if there was a department store in here?" There had been. Another vivid memory flashed up, a vast shop occupying one corner of the mall, filled with just about every item imaginable. My parents had let me spend 10 minutes in the toy department each time they visited, but they'd rarely bought me anything. I let myself get lost in the past, realising with sadness that I could picture every inch of that toy shop, the stuffed bears around the cash register, the magic sets stacked on the shelf opposite the elevator, the vast tree they always put up on the top floor every Christmas. But I couldn't remember what my parents looked like. In my head they were faceless mannequins that stood in the corner of my vision, moving every time I moved, so I could never see them clearly. "Yo, Alex!" said Simon, giving me a gentle tap on the shoulder. The memory flew, but left behind a dull throb of heartache. "You still with us? Department store? Remember?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, there is one. No idea where, though. Sorry. Coming in this way, everything's all back to front." Simon muttered something and carried on, the doors flashing past on either side. Furniture, phones, music and DVDs, underwear, pharmaceuticals, sweets. It was 5 minutes later, so deep into the warren of passageways that I didn't think I'd ever be able to navigate my way back, that we reached a double door marked Harvey's. "That's it," I blurted. "Harvey's, like the rabbit." Simon stopped and began to run his fingers along the edge of the right-hand door, eventually pulling free a thick cable. He peeled it away from the wall, splinters of paint fluttering earthward. "This won't take a second," he said, frowning in concentration. He used a long fingernail to split the installation lengthways. Then he clamped one of the wires in his broken teeth and bit down. "Whoa!" said Z. "Are you crazy?" Simon shook his head, chowing down on the wire like a rabid dog until it finally surrendered. He carefully folded the split ends away from each other, then let it fall back against the wall. "Stand back," he said. We did as we were told, and Simon threw himself at the doors. They were solid, and with a wheeze he rebounded onto his backside. Z's laughter tinkled down the corridor, the sound like wind chimes. Simon clambered to his feet and looked at me. "You want to do the honours?" I tensed up my upper body and ran at the doors, hitting them square in the middle. With a squeal that sounded almost human, the lock sprang and both sides flapped open. I stumbled forward into shadow, skidding across the smooth floor and almost losing my balance. By the time I turned around, Z and Simon had followed me in and closed the doors behind them. Simon slapped the wall a few times before hitting a bank of switches, flipping them all. Gradually the lights blinked to life, revealing another narrow corridor, this one lined with clothes racks, stacked pallets and various loose ends. Limbless store dummies eyeballed us. "How do you know how to get in?" asked Z, collapsing onto a shrink-wrapped sofa. He lifted his foot and I noticed it was bare, aside from a covering of blood. Paper shoes weren't much use on the outside. I flexed my toes inside the boots the warden had given me, happy that I hadn't thrown them on the fire the same way I'd thrown my black suit. "Piece of piss," Simon replied. "Done it countless times. I weren't no angel on the outside, remember?" He looked at me knowingly. "Hell, none of us was, right?" "Right," I replied. "Come on." I made my way to the end of the corridor, past a stockroom that was too similar to the ones in Furness for my liking. I peered inside, half expecting a rat to bound from the darkness and lock its teeth into my throat, and I turned away before I could think the creature into existence. "Oh God, I'm not getting in that," came Z's voice. I followed his line of sight to the elevator at the end of the hallway, the doors open as if inviting us in. It was about the same size as the one in Furness, not the main elevator, but the smaller one that linked the bottom of general population to the blood-drenched tunnels below. I was with Z on this one. I had no desire ever to ride in an elevator again. I just wouldn't trust it not to carry us to the bowels of hell. Fortunately, there was another door beside it, the round glass panel revealing a staircase beyond. We bounded through and started upwards. Every step felt like my last. I could have happily curled up right there and then on the cold concrete and slept for 1,000 years. I could barely even remember the last time I'd rested, an age ago, in a bed deep beneath the surface. I had just completed the warden's tests. He'd welcomed me into his family and called me his son, and I'd slept better than I had ever done in my life. The thought sent a chill scurrying up my spine, and I forced it from my mind. I'd have all the time in the world to sleep when we were out of the city. Right now I had to stay sharp. But still, tiredness gripped me like a funeral shroud, numbing my body and my mind, making the world seem dreamlike. And behind the exhaustion, something else, a feeling that I was hollow, empty. It was almost like hunger, but deeper, as though it came from the very core of my being, as though my soul was starving. I realised my thoughts were bordering on delusional, tried to switch them off in order to concentrate on putting one foot in front of the other. We climbed 3 flights before coming to a door, and Z pushed it open. "Women's clothing," he said. "Anyone fancy it?" Simon nudged his way past Z and through the door, holding it open for us. I staggered in to see that the store was alive, the lights on, the elevators running, and the gentle buzz of mall music giving the scene a surreal atmosphere. I shrank back, half expecting to see shoppers milling about between the racks of clothing. Then I realised that Simon must have switched everything on when we first arrived. There was no sign of a clock anywhere, and I had no idea what the time was, but given that the sun had barely risen, we probably still had a few hours before the mall opened for business. Not that it would be opening today, I thought, given the fact that the entire neighbourhood was crawling with escaped convicts and armed police. "Come on," said Simon, setting off across the shop floor. Harvey's was huge, each level seemingly endless, an endless expanse broken up by various displays and cash register stations. Simon made his way towards the nearest escalator, where a directory listed the various departments. He pressed an oversized finger against menswear. "Let's get some kit first," he said, hopping onto the moving steps. "I don't know, but I think this might be the best thing for you, Alex." I turned to see Z holding up a pair of huge blue maternity dungarees covered with friendly-faced sunflowers. He pressed them up against me and murmured approvingly. "They're probably the only thing in here that will fit you. And besides, the denim really brings out the colour of your bruises." I brushed them away with a half-hearted scowl. "You'll be wearing them on your head if you're not careful," I grumbled, stepping onto the escalator. It carried us up to the second level. To the left was an ocean of blacks and greys that stretched to the distant far wall. To the right was a small collection of sporting goods, and behind that a bank of televisions. Framing it all was a huge glass wall that looked out over the rest of the mall. Simon dashed into menswear with a cheerful whoop, but Z angled off towards the window. I followed Z, walking into a small cafe and peering through the thick glass. 2 levels of shops were laid out before us, lit by the dim glow of the mall's night security lights. On the ground floor I could make out a collection of cars and half expected to see police clambering out of them, but they were as still and as silent as the rest of the displays, and I realised that they were on show. "Looks like we're not alone," Z said. I cupped my hand against the glare, peering through my own reflection to see a group of inmates strolling out of the shattered glass of a hardware store window on the level beneath us. They were too far away to recognise, but they were all holding what looked like shotguns. I didn't remember there being a gun shop in the mall, but then things had changed a lot since I was a kid. "Maybe we should have thought of that," Z said. "Yeah, right," I replied, my breath clouding the view. "I haven't forgotten the last time you tried to use a gun. You almost killed us." "Shut up," he replied with a grin. He turned, sniffing the air like a dog, until he was facing a cabinet full of cakes. With a cry of delight, he leaped behind the cafe's counter, picked up a chocolate cupcake, and stuffed the entire thing in his mouth. He started to move, then doubled back and picked up another one before setting off in the direction of the electronics department. "This is great," he chirruped through a mouthful of cake. "I feel like we're in Dawn of the Dead or something. You ever see that? You know, when there are zombies all over the world and these people lock themselves up inside a mall." I kind of remembered watching the remake, but Z was spouting off again before I could reply. "Yeah, it was like the perfect place to hide out. You got food, supplies, water, everything you need. Loads of films and stuff. TVs like these ones, you'd never get bored." He'd reached the televisions and began turning them on one by one. Most showed nothing but static, others blank blue screens that made Z's face look even greyer than usual. Oh man, it would be so cool if that's what was happening. I hate to break it to you, Z, I said, but what's after us is a lot worse than zombies, and we really don't have time to watch a film. Z had finished with the televisions and was busy switching on the various DVD players and satellite boxes beneath them. 3 of the huge screens burst into life, the sudden flare of volume making my heart miss a beat. Z stood back to admire his handiwork, tucking into his second cupcake. He didn't offer me any, and I knew why. The last time I tried to eat anything, I'd spewed up everywhere. Another gift of the warden's poison. I'd never eat chocolate again. Does that look like a film? He said, pointing at the nearest screen. I looked to see a broadcaster sitting at a desk, her face a mask of seriousness. Behind her, on the studio screen, was live aerial footage of Furnace Penitentiary. In the short time since we'd escaped, the Black Fort, the building that formed the only entrance to the prison, had been gripped by fire. One entire side was now bathed in liquid flame, the smoke masking the cruel sculptures mounted beneath its cathedral-like spire. I wasn't sure if the destruction inside had spread or whether one of the inmates had started the Inferno on his way out, but I found myself grinning. Nothing could make me happier than watching that hellhole burn, especially knowing that the warden, the black suits and the wheezers and the rats too were still down there, trapped. I offered a silent prayer that they'd all die screaming. Except I knew that sooner or later the creeps would get out. The warden and his army, his sick force of freaks would hit the streets, and Alfred Furnace too. I could still hear his laughter buried deep in the black poison that circulated through my veins. He was on his way, and he was bringing his berserkers with him. They were all headed to the city. They were heading right here, right now, and I knew deep down that they weren't coming just to round up a bunch of escapees. Man, we totally trashed that place, Z said softly, another peal of laughter spilling from his grin. I stared at the screen, too mesmerised by the pixelated flames to reply. It was the prison that was on fire now, but when Furnace reached the city, the chaos would spread. It would spread far and wide. I couldn't help thinking that when he arrived, the whole world would burn. The next chapter is called Television. That's a weird chapter title, Television. The one after that is called... I won't tell you actually because it's a spoiler. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. I hope you enjoyed that. Oh yeah, I'm starting to remember it now. The events of Fugitives. I just remember it being just non-stop all the way from the start to the finish. It's quite exhilarating. Okay. I will see you tomorrow morning for the next couple of chapters. I'll see how long they are. Maybe do 2 or 3 chapters tomorrow. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful time, wonderful day. And I hope you're all great. Any questions, just pop them in the comments below. I don't often get a chance to reply, but I always read them, and I'll do my best to reply in the videos if anyone does have any questions. Okay, see you all soon. Have a lovely day.